In touch.
As you know,
his detractors say he's conducted an inquisition, a witch hunt, blackmail. His job? To probe the Iran-Contra scandal. 5.5 years and more than $30 million. And 10 convictions later, he's still looking.
The decision to indict me is a grotesque distortion of the prosecutorial power and a moral and a legal outrage.
Tonight, a rare television conversation with Lawrence Walsh.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Back in December of 1986, as he was approaching his 75th birthday, Lawrence Walsh might easily have been celebrated as the very model of mainstream Republican virtues by the Republican establishment itself. A distinguished Oklahoma City attorney, Judge Walsh served during the Eisenhower administrations as a deputy U.S. Attorney General and as a U.S. District Judge. Had he retired in 1986, he would have been fondly remembered and no doubt saluted by every senior Republican from President Reagan on down. Instead, Judge Walsh accepted an appointment as independent counsel to investigate the Iran-Contra scandal. Among those indicted as a consequence of that investigation, Oliver North, John Poindexter, Robert McFarlane, Elliott Abrams, all of them senior members of the Reagan administration. And then, last week, the senior-most member to date, Caspar Weinberger, was indicted on 5 felony charges. To say that Judge Walsh and his associates are controversial is to understate the case.
Let's look at the results of the $35 million that they've spent on the Walsh prosecutions. North case overturned, Poindexter case overturned, a few plea bargains in which it's clear the people simply can't afford to defend themselves. One sustained conviction of somebody nobody has ever heard of on tax charges. This is what we get for $35 million.
Misleading Congress, perjury, concealing evidence. These are serious matters. They are very large in the scheme of things. This is not a nickel and dime investigation. You are talking about abuse of power at the highest levels of government.
I think the Walsh prosecution has been pretty much of a disgrace. It is a exercise in unbridled ambition. It is a perfect example why the U.S. government was set up as a system of competition. Madison said ambition must be made to counter ambition. And in the Walsh special prosecution, what you have is a situation where there is unlimited budget, unlimited duration, and basically no accountability.
It is not Judge Walsh criminalizing policy differences. It is rather people in the administration and their allies who have tried to get an immunity from criminal behavior because of policy differences.
And what you've got is people pursuing a vendetta. I mean, it's almost like a group of vigilantes that came into Washington. There's no rule of law, there's no boundaries. These people can just about ruin anybody they want. And of course, they've already done that with countless people involved in this thing, who've lost their jobs, lost their income, lost any possibility of resuscitating themselves.
A civil libertarian in Washington today is clearly a conservative whose friends have been indicted. And we have people on the right politically finding virtue in constitutional protections for the accused, which they have heretofore denounced very vigorously.
Joining us now in our Washington studios, Judge Lawrence Walsh. The charges, too much money, too much time, too much zeal, too much almost of everything, to which you would respond?
There's no easy way to do it. There's no inexpensive way to do it. There's no quick way to do it. The charge which my office and I received from the court told us that we were to prosecute any violation of law related to the activities of Colonel North in connection with the Iran sales or the Contra support, and any other government officer who assisted him or worked in concert with him, or any persons working with a government officer. Or
How do you decide when enough is enough, Judge?
Well, it seems to me that time certainly draws you down and builds a barrier at some point. But as long as we continue to work up toward the center of responsibility, it's very difficult to give a good reason for stopping. In other words, the first impression that was given by the old administration was that Colonel North was a sort of a renegade, a person who went off on his own and did various things that were that broke the law. Actually, what we have found in the last 2 or 3 years is that he had enormous support. That the three great agencies that are concerned with the national security of this country, State, Defense, and the CIA, were supporting him readily, not grudgingly. Now, it's very hard to believe that a lieutenant colonel personally can develop that kind of support.
Which is essentially what he and his counsel were saying all along.
Yes, but the fact was, it wasn't the fact that he was being directed by others, as he and his counsel said, didn't constitute a defense for his own misconduct, but it certainly implicated the others for whom he was acting. Now, that is why it seemed to me that having spent a very large amount of money to get through the North and the Poindexter trials, it would be not fully, the full value wouldn't be received unless we continued to see who was supporting him and who was supervising him.
We're going to take a break for a moment, Judge Walsh, but when we come back, I'd like to focus on a phrase you used a couple of minutes ago, namely moving toward the center of power. Right. We'll be back with more of our conversation with Judge Lawrence Walsh in a moment.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Charles Schwab.
Everyone has a dream, a vision deep inside.
With all the mutual funds out there, I needed an easy way to help me compare them.
We make it easier to follow your own lead.
With Schwab's free mutual funds performance guide, I can compare track records on over 500 funds.
Always there to give you just the help you need.
Help yourself at Schwab today.
Don't get hit by an annual fee. Carry the card that doesn't charge one. And keep yourself out of the hole. It pays to discover.
Polyshades by Minwax. It's a stroke of genius. Polyshades is rich stain and polyurethane protection in one. Polyshades gives wood a beautiful protective finish in half the time. Polyshades by Minwax.
Every time the Grand Prix comes to town, you dream about being a race car driver. Just because you're not a race car driver doesn't mean you can't have fun while you're driving. That's why your Ford dealers are having their Grand Prix of savings with the best deals of the year, like the top Ford F-150. Grand Prix priced at just $10,877. That's less than $10,900 for America's favorite full-size truck 15 years running. But at this price, they're really moving fast. So stop dreaming and have some fun. The starting line is at your Ford dealer.
Women charge assault by a gang of the Navy's top guns. This lieutenant blew the whistle. Hear her exclusive story as told to Peter Jennings on ABC's World News Tonight tomorrow.
Continuing now our conversation with Special Prosecutor Lawrence Walsh. You spoke a moment ago of moving toward the center of power. You have already now brought about the indictment of former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger. Is he the center of power that you're talking about?
I really would rather not comment on Secretary Weinberger because he's now under indictment. Within the terms of the indictment, though, it is apparent that the center of interest as to a part of the investigation were certain White House meetings in the fall of 1986, and which had to do with activities by high government officials in the fall of 1985.
Now, it is no secret as to who attended some of those meetings. That information has been contained, I believe, in the indictments
was in the
themselves.
indictment, yes.
We're talking about President Reagan. We're talking about former Secretary of State Schultz. We're talking about, at least one or two of those meetings, now President Bush, then Vice President Bush. Are those the centers of power that you're alluding to?
They would be within the centers of power,
Well,
yes,
of course they would, by definition.
Without identifying them specifically.
The question, obviously, Judge Walsh, and it has been posed again and again, and sometimes it's posed in the form of a question, sometimes in the form of an accusation. Let me pose it in the form of a question. And that is, are you really after Ronald Reagan here, and are you simply going to keep on going until you reach that ultimate center of power?
I think we can very honestly say we aren't after anyone. We haven't been after anyone. We're trying to follow the evidence where it leads. We have before this hypothesis of activity, and we explore that activity without having a predetermined person in mind. I think it would not be accurate to say that we were after President Reagan in any sense of the word.
I mean, forgive me for using a little bit of a fighting word here, but that's just a trifle disingenuous, isn't it? How can you have been involved in 5.5 years worth of negotiations without having developed not only some theories of your own as to whether or not President Reagan was involved, but some fairly deep convictions?
There is no question that various theories and hypotheses are regularly evaluated. But that doesn't... one thing you have to learn to do in this business is to keep your mind open and not make a predetermination and then try to prove a predetermined theory.
I know you have already said, and I'm going to run the risk of getting into a little bit of a confrontation with you on this, only to the degree you've said you don't want to talk about Caspar Weinberger's case. Let's talk about what's on the public record, though, with regard to the Weinberger case. He and his counsel, particularly his counsel, have suggested that an offer was made to Mr. Weinberger that would have permitted him to plead guilty to a single misdemeanor. Is that true?
I don't like to get into a discussion of our off-the-record meetings, but I think that enough of it has been talked about in public to say that it is true. That we gave extreme consideration to Mr. Weinberger. Nobody wanted to see him indicted. There was the hope that although his counsel wasn't able to convince us on any other ground, that there might be some way of resolving the controversy. But that did not prove out. They did not seek to do that.
There is then an obvious follow-up question, Judge Walsh, and that is, if you were prepared to let it go for a pleading of a single misdemeanor, either the 5 criminal indictments now have a tinge of vengefulness to them, or one has to ask the question, why were you prepared to give up on 5 very serious criminal charges in exchange for 1 misdemeanor?
There's no element of vengefulness. If the case is to be tried, it has to be tried comprehensively and completely. And that's the reason for those, for the indictment being as broad as it is.
What I'm saying is, it seems like a hell of a good deal. Well, if I'm facing the possibility of 5 counts, 5 criminal counts, and I'm being offered, Ted, we'll let you off on a pleading of 1 misdemeanor, I'm going to grab that with both hands, unless, of course, there's a very sharp hook deeply embedded in that misdemeanor.
But there was no hook, and
no quid pro quo?
I don't want to be the least bit unfair. We never finished the discussion because they were not interested. So I don't want to be unfair to them or to us, but there was an exploration and no further determination made on it.
But you understand where I'm going. There had to be a quid pro quo. In other words, you don't simply offer to drop 5 felony counts in exchange for 1 misdemeanor.
No. What you would expect would be a truthful cooperation, but nothing more than that.
Truthful cooperation
the same as we've heard from other people who've pleaded guilty.
But you don't need a truthful cooperation from Caspar Weinberger to go over ground that you have already plowed. So
Well,
it would have to be
what you want is, I think the expression I used with them was the rock bottom truth and the whole truth. That's what we wanted.
Which would have to lead up, not down.
Not necessarily. Depends on where it goes. You don't know these things ahead of time.
Except that you've looked at the diaries.
Well, we've looked at the diary. We know what his records show, of course. But and I'm now getting into a discussion of the case, which I probably shouldn't.
All right, let's take a commercial break, and we'll be right back. More with Judge Walsh in a moment.
Look at these red marks. These old glasses do nothing but pinch. They're a pain.
You don't have to put up with glasses that don't fit anymore.
Now LensCrafters brings you better fit for greater comfort. LensCrafters glasses fit your snug points with features like new self-adjusting snug fit pads that flex to gently and securely hug your nose.
No more pinching. I never knew glasses could be this comfortable.
LensCrafters, better fit for greater comfort. In about an hour.
In our universe, there is always the unknown, the unpredictable. All we can do is prepare for it.
AT&T is now installing Fast Start. It can detect a cable cut instantly, so 800 calls can get back in minutes instead of hours.
We can send wireless for any occasion, anywhere, but only if our 800 service is up and running. Our 800 service isn't just a phone line, it's a lifeline.
I miss you.
AT&T has the most reliable 800 service, period.
AT&T. Call us.
There's a thin line between life and death, for road construction workers and for you. Last year, 8 people died in road work zones, and 6 of them were in motor vehicles. Watch for the orange signs, and watch for the other traffic. A little bit of caution now will let them get their jobs done, and we'll all be around to enjoy it later.
ABC News continues its report of shocking sexual attacks allegedly by the Navy's top guns. Sam Donaldson, the full story, primetime, Thursday.
And we are back once again with Special Prosecutor Lawrence Walsh. Why go after a 74, 75-year-old man who clearly is not in good health? It must have occurred to you. Indeed, I will tell you quite frankly what I've heard the rumors are. The rumors are that you really didn't want to go after him, but that it was one of your associates, Mr. Gillen, who was determined to go after him.
Oh, there was that. The fact that I didn't want to go after him is accurate. The fact that Mr. Gillen wanted to, I think, in the sense that he wanted to prosecute someone, I think is not accurate. I think that we both were very concerned, and we both gave it extended discussion, and both with Mr. Weinberger's counsel and internally within our office. There was no, it was a very carefully developed position that the office took.
Had there been anything other than the insistence that Mr. Weinberger, to use the old prison parlance, snitch on colleagues, why wouldn't he have accepted the deal?
You have to ask him that. It seemed to me that we were doing the best we could for him and for us, confronted with the circumstances that we were.
As you have heard, the critics, who ironically are people with whom you probably would have had more in common 5.5 years ago than otherwise. The critics say you've spent too much money, that you really have, that there are no limitations on this, either financially or in terms of timing or in terms of there being some sort of a governor, that Lawrence Walsh really needs to respond to no one.
I think that is a valid concern, and it's a concern that I have every day, and I understand very well the criticism that we've received. But I think we have to understand that the scope of my work was set by the order of the court that appointed me. I didn't ask for it. I didn't determine it myself. The scope was prescribed by the court's order. And that order was based upon the application of Attorney General Meese. The court somewhat expanded that application. But that is where the scope of the work is determined. And if there are to be limitations placed, that is where the limitations should be. But once you are assigned this enormous job of investigating 3 major government departments, plus the White House, plus the National Security Council, there's no way you can do it inexpensively or quickly. If it's to be done thoroughly, you have to choose between making a gesture and grabbing a 1 or 2 things to investigate and say, we're all done, or you have to sit back and try to look at it thoroughly and analyze each aspect of the responsibility that we were given, and then go ahead and do it. Now that, as you know, and as we all know now, litigation is a very expensive thing. In addition to just taking the North trial, Colonel North was good enough to be on here tonight. The North trial, there were 102 pretrial motions. His counsel brought those motions. We didn't. We responded to them, but we had to respond. The amount of work that went into that case was enormous, but it was his counsel who was making the going, who took the initiative. Now, in addition to the expense that would have been involved if we could have tried Poindexter, North, Hakeem, and Secord all together, we were forced to double that cost because Congress granted immunity to North, Poindexter, and Hakeem, and the trial court quite properly concluded that they couldn't be tried together, that one would certainly expose the other's immunized testimony. So they had to be dealt with separately.
So how does something like this ever end?
It's going to end very soon now, I think, because I think we're getting closer and closer to the exhaustion of our responsibility.
Well, except when you talk about the responsibility for supervision, if indeed as a consequence of the Weinberger trial, it becomes clear that he was simply doing what he was told to do, or that he was not responsible, but his testimony ultimately reveals who was responsible, do you not then have to go on?
Well, then that would turn on what might come out, and again, I can't discuss the likelihood or lack of likelihood of that.
No, but I mean, theoretically, you've discussed it up until this point. Yeah. Each person revealing the supervisory responsibility of the next person up the line leads to another element of the case.
Well, there aren't too many levels left.
Precisely. We've got George Bush, we've got Ronald Reagan, and we've got George Shultz. I mean, those are the only 3 left.
I don't want to quibble, but it's not quite that simple.
In terms of supervisory, in other words, those who were senior to Caspar Weinberger, there's only 3 of them.
I think there's only actually 1 who was senior to.
Well, the Vice President, Secretary of State is considered senior in terms of in the cabinet.
Things like that.
If someone had told you 5.5 years ago when you were first asked, this thing is going to cost in excess of $30-some-odd million and it's going to last more than 5.5 years, what would your reaction have been?
My reaction would have been, if it's going to last over 5.5 years, it'll probably cost $30 million. But I would want to think a long time before I took the job, because it's something that everyone very much wants over as soon as possible.
All things considered, though, are you glad you took it?
I don't know whether glad is the right word. I think my decision was the correct one, that if the court asks me to do it, I have an obligation to do it, and it was extraordinarily interesting work. It's not a very pleasant work where you're prosecuting people that you instinctively like, but it's work that has to be done if we're going to protect the checks and balances of the Constitution, which require that no matter how popular an executive may be, he's subject to supervision by Congress and subject to Congress's oversight, and therefore those in his administration who are asked questions by congressional committees acting as a body, not just as a group, just as an individual, but where you have a formal inquiry by Congress, Congress must have a honest response. Either that or the president can say he won't respond, or but he can't permit the executive officers. We can't permit executive officers to respond dishonestly.
When all is said and done, this probably could have been avoided if President Reagan had just come out and said essentially what you've just suggested. Yes, I ordered it, I did it. If you don't like it, do something about it. But I, as president, think this was the right thing to do.
That would have certainly put the issue on the table, and then Congress would have to decide whether it wanted to deal with impeachment or not.
Judge Walsh, thank you very much. It was good of you to join us.
Thank you very much for having me, and I enjoyed being with you.
Thank you, sir. I'll be back in a moment.
We built the Maytag refrigerator with shelves, bins, and drawers that will adjust to meet your changing needs in years to come, and solid heavy-duty parts to last for years to come.
Yo, Mom!
We can only guess what the world will be like in years to come. But it's nice to know that whatever the future holds, your Maytag will too. Buy one now and get the best warranty in the business.
Here goes my future.
Hi, and it's code for 148 Nursing Andrews, Solid Nursing. Thank you, 1 clear. 814 clear.
Of all the things around your house that need batteries, there's one thing that needs a good, fresh battery most of all. See your Allstate agent for a free home fire safety brochure. And please, check the battery in your smoke detector often.
It may surprise you to learn who, over 30 years ago, was the first car maker to build cars with seat belts, to make safety glass standard, the first U.S. car maker to offer anti-lock brakes, and who today offers more models with dual airbags than any other manufacturer. That company is Ford Motor Company.
We're committed to making safety innovation an important part of quality.
Ford Motor Company. Quality is job one. It's working. If you're using a credit card to get a cash advance, you're probably getting soaked. Because ordinary cards charge you interest. Right from day one. Which is why you should use the Discover card. Just pay your full monthly balance and a small transaction fee, and we'll give you cash, interest-free. So you can avoid taking a bath. It pays to Discover.
How you can supercharge your savings when interest rates hit rock bottom. Then an easy new way to find out if your food is fit or fat. Also Paul Newman on the next Good Morning America.
For the latest from around the nation and the world, turn to World News Now, later tonight on this ABC station. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
If you wish a videocassette version of Nightline, the cost is $14.98, plus $3.95 shipping and handling.
Nightline is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
Wednesday.
I'm involved with the guy.
How involved? Can Charlie handle some competition?
I don't believe it. What?
Come on, did you see that guy?
I think you're jealous.
Are you kidding? Of him? I'm jealous.
The court has no authority to act in matters of the heart.
Not all men are rats. And if you look a little closer to home, you might find that out. Civil Wars, Wednesday.